Imagine a winter equivalent to 7 beasts from the east, one after the other. In 1963, this is exactly what happened.
Who'd think this was Britain? Looks more like a camp in the frozen wastes of Siberia.
It was as though Britain suddenly became as rigid as an ironing board. Nothing moved. The ground was solid ice.
Southend Pier surrounded by ice floe.
Britain called the worst winter for over 250 years the Big Freeze.
I would like to call it climate change on steroids.
Lasting for 10 long weeks.
You thought, will it ever end?
Temperatures below minus 22 degrees centigrade.
My God, if you needed to go to the loo early in the morning, God help you.
Bringing death and destruction on a vast scale.
It was estimated that 120 people had lost their lives.
About half of all our wild bird population died.
In an era when the nation was totally dependent on fossil fuel.
More often than not, the coal is frozen solid.
In the dying days of the steam age.
I couldn't have joined the railway at a worse time.
How did Brits cope?
Best place to be is home by the fireside, waiting for the next power cut.
I remember it very, very sharply. I was married, a very young mother.
I was a young reporter.
I was in my second year of A-levels.
And when the thaw finally came, it would herald the swinging 60s.
Everything was no longer the same it had been before.
On Christmas Eve, 1962, a cold wind started to blow from the north. An icy blast swept through Scotland and snow began to fall. Glasgow experienced its first white Christmas since 1938. And by Boxing Day, the whole of England was covered by a pristine blanket of snow.
We had a white Christmas, which was great fun at first, of course, because there were snowball fights and sledging and things like that.
Boy, did it snow. I'm still excited about snow. I know I'm a big kid, but I mean, I still find snow exciting. It just is lovely. It looks great.
We celebrated Boxing Day very much in Northern Ireland, and you saw all your family, so it was magical to witness that, the whiteness of the snow and still the warmth of everybody together.
The kids would have loved it, of course, all that heavy snowfall around, but that ruined the sport. Naturally, sport was absolutely decimated.
The first casualty of the Big Freeze was the cancellation of all horse racing.
Skis down the straight, but I wouldn't bet on them. In betting shops, looking like the Labour Exchange in a boom town, bookies have been forced to gamble among themselves. One enterprising chap in Doncaster started mouse racing. Unusual experience losing his shirt on a mouse, but these events have now been called off at the request of British mouse lovers.
How Brits chose to celebrate the Christmas break over 1962 may now seem a world away. But in the run-up to the festive season, there were certain parallels to present times. A Conservative government had been in power for 12 years, led by Prime Minister Harold Macmillan.
Harold Macmillan had been to school at Eton. He shot grouse. He spoke in a manner that he had learned from his nanny.
A Britain with modern transport and communication, with express passenger trains and freight liners plying at record speeds between our great cities.
The government seemed to have been in power all my life, and they were very much establishment figures.
Just 2 months before the Big Freeze, East and West had been at loggerheads over the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Missiles of 1,500 miles range and more were pointing at American cities.
All-out nuclear war with Russia seemed a very real prospect.
I was in a very beautiful and very sort of humble little school. It was an Anglo-Catholic convent. We did a lot of chapel in those days, and it was a very tense time. But we were all asked to pray that it wouldn't happen, and it didn't.
There was a bit of a fear in the country, not to mention the fact that the weather was getting worse, seemingly. They used to go around saying, "It didn't used to be like this, I blame them Sputniks. Those Russians have sent the rockets up there, that Yuri Gagarin. It's all their fault, you know." The main problem, if you go back to the beginning of December, was the fog. It wasn't so much the snow, which was yet to come. This was full-blown smog. It was yellow. You could taste it. It was horrible.
Mask wearing was the order of the day.
For most Londoners, it's been another choking journey home tonight. Pedestrians choking into their smog-filled scarves, cars choking in fog-bound queues.
As temperatures started to drop and millions of Londoners sparked up their coal fires, a freezing toxic cocktail of polluted smog smothered the capital.
There was a sort of smog that would have been familiar to Dickens. Really thick, mustardy, yellowy, horrible veil that comes down. You can't even see your hand in front of your face.
Well, one of my most vivid memories is it was extremely cold and there was a terrible fog and all the traffic stopped. I couldn't see the other side of the road at all.
If any motorist is thinking of abandoning his car here in Edgware, there's a seasonal greeting awaiting him.
Doctors urged people to stay inside and stay safe.
The best thing to do is not to go out unless you've got to, and to anybody with bronchitis or somebody who is in a rather precarious position with respect to health, ought to stay at home and keep warm and do sensible things like that. You know, go to bed with a cup of cocoa.
Pollution from Britain's chimneys, 3/4 of it from ordinary domestic fires, is not only ugly, it's expensive. This clean, healthy lung belonged to someone who spent all her life in the country. This blackened lung to a city dweller.
The smog caused by the early December cold snap was just a hint of what was to come. By Boxing Day, poor visibility returned, but this time, thanks to snow in temperatures as low as -5 degrees centigrade, the Big Freeze was about to claim its first fatalities. The midday Scott Express from Glasgow to London was packed with 500 travellers returning home after Christmas. As it approached the Coppenhall Junction in Cheshire, driver John Russell shot a red light. Ahead in the darkness and freezing smoke, the Liverpool to Birmingham Express was stationary at a signal. In the consequent carnage, 33 were injured, but 12 adults and 6 children lost their lives.
I actually joined railway in January '63, got Wolverhampton, which was right at the heart of this. When a railway accident happens, it's usually terrible. When you get one on Boxing Day, particularly because it's that time of year, it's a particularly tragic one. You remember seeing all the parcels, you know, all the Christmas presents, the horror of it.
Passing cars stopped to shine headlights on the wreckage to help rescuers, and a local farmer was forced to turn his livestock sheds into a morgue.
It was human error and a combination of circumstances, not the automatic warning system that caused the crash.
The driver would have been hugely experienced, but he would have been driving within conditions he had no way of controlling in the end, and the conditions just bit him.
But on Boxing Day 1962, no one knew that the tragedy at Crewe was just the Big Freeze's opening salvo. Merely the herald to a further 10 weeks of chaos, struggle, and misery. Across the nation, Brits had been celebrating the novelty of a white Christmas.
For road users, sheer nightmare. At the very peak time of family reunions. It all happened so suddenly, everyone was taken unawares.
But they had no idea that these first inches of snow in the last week of 1962 were merely the opening flurry to the coldest winter for over 200 years. After Boxing Day, temperatures began to plummet.
When even reindeer have to be brought into shelter, it's quite a winter.
As the nation retreated indoors, unrelenting Siberian winds continued to blow from the east.
We're already starting to see what you'd probably call these days something of a climate change Armageddon. I would like to call it climate change on steroids.
Initially, Britain tried to put a brave face on the cold snap.
It's a chilling experience for any warm-blooded animal when even the seals have to huddle together to keep out some of the shivering cold. Come on in. The water's warm compared with the icy shore.
BEA was forced to cancel 37 flights from London Airport, and the nation's embryonic motorway system quickly became an ice rink. Then it got really serious. From the 28th to the 30th of December, a series of vicious blizzards, the worst for 15 years, engulfed the country, with the southwest bearing the brunt of the storm.
It's an ill blizzard that blows nobody any good. So boom time for makers of skid chains. A good job somebody keeps the craft alive.
Devon and Cornwall have always been one of the country's blizzard black spots. In March 2018, 80 people were forced to spend the night at a school after heavy snow shut a 64-mile stretch of the A30.
Police have declared this weather a major incident, urging people to stay at home. And in conditions like this, you can see why.
60 years ago, it was the same story on the same stretch of road. Gusts of 90 miles per hour whipped the snow into huge drifts up to 20 feet deep.
And I remember being stunned, really, by, I think it was about 70 lorry drivers who got marooned in huge drifts of snow, and they had to leave their trucks and they had all to sleep in a school hall somewhere near Cornwall. And I remember thinking, is it really that bad?
We had to spend the night in the back of the furniture van.
Now, you were in a furniture van?
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, we're moving from Birmingham to Cornwall.
What sort of a night did you have, Leslie?
Oh, it was quite warm.
Was it warm?
She had the dog sleeping on top of her. She was all right. And the cat slept in the tea chest.
Did you make some food?
Well, we toasted and crumpets first thing this morning.
But 3 people died from exposure, and 2 more suffocated in a snowbound car. Princetown, in the middle of Dartmoor, was cut off for 2 days. Dry milk, tinned foods, and 56 pounds of yeast for the prison bakery were delivered by helicopter from Tavistock.
Once again, postman Jack Bellamy proved the superiority of the pony when it comes to delivering the mail on Dartmoor. They covered their 20-mile round today, as they've done for many years.
About a week or so after the snow had just begun to fall, it suddenly started to feel less magical and more serious.
But what had caused this unprecedented weather bomb? The BBC's flagship documentary strand Tonight made best efforts to explain the catastrophic conditions to Brits, as introduced by the enigmatic Cliff Mitchellmore.
What's the explanation that our weather experts offer as the cause of it all?
The weekend after Christmas, a belt of warm air tried to get up from the south. But by now, the cold front here was so dug in that it beat back the warm air. The result of this was a clash, and the blizzard, which particularly struck the southwest.
If you're going back 60 years to the period of 62, 63 weather forecasting, well, it was very much in the infancy as far as the media was concerned. You were doing a 24-hour forecast if you were lucky. We didn't have the computers, so you were doing it with pen and paper. We were doing it with observations coming in from ships, from aircraft, and from radio sons going up into the atmosphere several times a day in different parts of the country.
But in spite of the poor forecast, in London's Trafalgar Square, New Year celebrations carried on regardless.
Nelson's timbers might be shivering up above, but that was nothing to the shivering going on down below. frantic, frozen frolics. Well, I hope the outlook's brighter and warmer than these 3 cards in a fountain.
From New Year's Day through to the second week of January, the story of snowstorms turned into one of ice.
Snow, blizzard, and the lowest temperatures for years and years. What a way to begin the new year.
We're seeing their coldest spell in winter since, well, certainly 1814, and for some, maybe as far back as 1740. This was pretty unprecedented, and some places did actually see round about 16 days where the temperature never got above freezing.
With temperatures constantly below -2 degrees centigrade, it was enough to freeze the sea.
Southend Pier surrounded by ice floe. Night after night of temperatures around 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Day after day with the mercury well below freezing. Even the sea frozen over.
At Dunkirk, the ice stretched out to sea for 5 miles. And the car ferry service to Fishbourne and the Isle of Wight was cancelled because of dangerous pack ice.
In some places, stretches of the Thames are frozen solid for the first time in 60 years. Memories of cruising on a hot summer's day seem long ages away.
And on the Grand Union Canal, it would have been possible to skate from Brentford to the Midlands.
How about keeping warm?
Well, you have to wear 3 of everything. 3 jumpers, three pairs of trousers, and make it warm all the way through.
Do you envy people living in centrally heated houses at this time? You do?
Very much.
The average British family was ill prepared for the big freeze's icy embrace.
3 million people in Britain were considered to be living in abject poverty, in slums.
Post-war austerity still gripped the nation. Rationing had finished only 9 years before.
Almost a third of the population, staggeringly, did not have a plumbed-in bathroom. 6 million people shared an outside lavatory with someone else in their street.
By God, if you needed to go to the loo early in the morning, God help you, because you needed to be a brave boy.
I do remember the toilet freezing up. The water in the bowl, was frozen, so I had to get a kettle of hot water and pour it into the loo to get rid of the ice.
Our toilet was a part of the house, but it was outside. You never shut the door. You're sitting with this, 3 foot, 4 foot of snow.
You had to scrape the frost off the inside of the windows before you could see out.
My poor sister, God rest her soul, I used to do terrible tricks, like stick her tongue to the window, and she would stick to the window.
I was living in Northern Ireland at that time, married, a very young mother, and Karen was a baby, so I felt terribly isolated and hemmed in. And I remember my then husband having to dig a tunnel out from the front door so that we could just get out into the main street.
We were always encouraged to keep the windows open, even at night time in the dormitory or your own little room. And flannels would freeze on the washstand, rigid, rock hard. Everything was frozen. And to keep warm, we tended to sleep in our clothes.
By January the 6th, 1,300 sheep and ponies had been dug out of Dartmoor snowdrifts and 20,000 driving tests cancelled. Then, in the middle of the month, Arctic winds brought another 4 inches of snow. Britain's very basic road infrastructure, barely recognisable to today's network of motorways, had ceased to function.
I was a very young man in the winter of 1962-63, but I was at school. I was up in the Pennines, where obviously conditions were far worse than in some other places. We were the only valley route open from Lancashire to Yorkshire because there wasn't an M62 in those days. Every now and again we were on the news because of the gridlock in the town, because of miles and miles and miles of standing traffic.
200 main roads were permanently closed, with 130,000 miles of highway obstructed. Many of the most important routes were blocked for 50 consecutive days. Scotland and Cornwall were effectively cut off from England. On January 19th, 250 workers found themselves stranded at the Fylingdales Ballistic Missile Warning Station on top of the North Yorkshire moors.
Who'd think this was Britain? Looks more like a camp in the frozen wastes of Siberia. Might just as well be Siberia, for it'll be many days before roads to the outside world can be reopened.
Helicopters were scrambled when workers embarked on a desperate 4-mile breakout trek through 10-foot deep snowdrifts to a railway for rescue. It would be down to local branch lines like these to keep those in remote and rural areas alive.
What we have to remember is that in '62 we still had an amazing rail network. The rail network covered small villages that today you wouldn't believe had rail services, but they did.
Even though these were the dying days of the steam age, the railways would be forced to step up and save the day.
Whenever the big blizzards surprise the life out of us by hitting Britain, these railwaymen, little though they're used to it, win thanks and admiration all round, clearing the points and keeping the trains running. No easy job on a railway network which still runs more miles of track than the whole of the United States. Teeth-chattering work it is, but they keep the trains flashing past.
Today's electrified railways are particularly vulnerable to icy conditions.
About an hour we were in pitch black with just the light of mobile phones and the odd torch or two.
In 1963, the country faced similar challenges.
What sort of journey did you have?
Oh, a miserable journey. I've often been over to France and back in the time it took me to get from Holyhead to here.
What about the charge that on the continent they do better? This isn't true, of course.
The railways were the most important mode of travel. Yes, there were people with cars, but still the majority of us travelled by bus or by train. Certainly, I mean, I never even learnt to drive till I was 28.
The government's strategy was to keep the sprawling railway network open at all costs.
Nobody complained because they've seen the conditions, because they relied on the train that much, but they knew that the railway would get through. It would be absolutely almost impossible that it didn't get through.
Furthermore, with the country dependent on coal for heating and power, the lifeblood of the nation had to be kept pumping.
More often than not, the coal is frozen solid. We offer a vote of thanks to the blokes who've had to unload the trucks in freezing weather.
But a reliance on Victorian technology did have some surprising advantages.
When the diesels came in, which is what they did in '62, '63, of course the diesel froze in the tanks and they couldn't even start them. So we fell back on the steam engines. The steam engines got almost a second lease of life. They were almost bulletproof.
The story of the railways during the Big Freeze is full of irony.
That winter brought it home hard how much it does cost to run the railway. Anybody who looked at the railway would say it's losing money because we're going places that it's not economical to go.
Just 3 weeks after the Big Freeze, an infamous report written by Dr. Beeching, the chairman of British Railways, identified over 2,000 non-profitable stations and 5,000 miles of railway line for closure. 55% of stations were destined for the axe.
How much hardship will these changes cause in country districts?
To passengers, relatively little. But there will be some places of difficulty, and if there is thought to be hardship, then arrangements will have to be made.
When I joined the railways, I had this bright, shiny vision. I went as a trainee to be a boilersmith, which really, in hindsight, me becoming a trainee in '63 was a ridiculous thing, really, to think about.
60 years on, Britain is now seeking to expand the rail network and reopen some local lines.
Rail use is now at the same level it was in the 1920s, years after Beeching's axe. They're finally coming back to life.
But back in 1963, despite valiant efforts on the railways, a nation fueled by and dependent on coal was close to total collapse. And now the government would find itself in the middle of a new storm, one that would prove even more costly than the weather.
All I know is that people in hospital should not be allowed to die because there's some industrial dispute.
By By the last week of January 1963, Brits had been living in a deep freeze lockdown for exactly a month.
Of course, I think everybody will remember the hope that they had within their soul that this thing would go away and that life might get back to what you would deem normality. I used to knit all the time for myself and for Karen, and of course, loving the fact of having a television all to yourself. The television was, of course, not only company, entertainment, and news. The news was really important because we needed to know what was happening in the outside world.
While families battened down the hatches, young people did their best to venture outside.
The cats grab life with both hands and do their best to live it 100% 24 hours a day. Life lies before them. They've got vitality, pep, and they're certainly with it. And the best of luck.
I think there was a recognition that being a teenager, being young, was no longer a sort of inconvenient rite of passage that you had to go through in order to become adult.
Everywhere, the cats have their own little places where they live the gospel that this is the age of the teenager.
So if you were a teenager, you would have been listening on your English radio to Adam Faith, Cliff Richard, and this young schoolgirl, Helen Shapiro. They were clean and wholesome.
On the 10th of January, Cliff Richard released one of the biggest grossing films of 1963. Ironically, it was called Summer Holiday.
It was expected to be a film premiere such as the West End had never seen before. But that turned out to be putting it mildly. The idea was for that great star, Cliff Richard, to reenact a part of the film Summer Holiday by driving the now famous bus from Piccadilly to the theatre.
Meanwhile, up in Liverpool, a group of 4 friends were playing in a seedy basement cellar. Of course, they were the Beatles. At the beginning of this winter, really outside Liverpool, they were pretty much unknown.
In just a few weeks' time, the Beatles would be at the top of the charts. But in early January, they were on a torrid tour of Scotland with gigs cancelled thanks to the snow. On the 4th, they played in Dingwall to just 20 fans. On the 5th, they entertained 100 drunken farmers in Stirling. The freezing conditions were bringing the country to a standstill. But then, on the 29th of January, yet more blizzards returned with a vengeance.
That's where it got bad again pretty quickly. Almost a beast from the east, but more prolonged than that.
But how does the relentless onslaught of the big freeze compare to more recent cold snaps?
The beast from the east lived up to its billing this morning, making its presence felt to the many trying to get to work and school across the UK.
The 2018 beast from the east lasted for 10 days.
Commuters were warned to return home early or risk being stranded in London.
The very cold snap in December 2009 was twice as long, lasting 3 weeks.
The cars got stuck outside the house. Couldn't get up the road anyway because there was a bus in the way. There was just total nightmare everywhere.
1982 saw similar chaos and snowdrifts 23 feet deep. Dubbed the Big Snow, the country suffered reoccurring blizzards for the best part of a month.
This village on the edge of Dartmoor still had to be reached, and on the blocked main road was evidence of the ferocious conditions the emergency services faced during the blizzard.
So you'll be digging in for one more night, do you think?
Probably more than that.
Yet in 1962-63, Arctic conditions lasted for nearly 3 months. Why did they hang around for so long? Like more recent cold snaps, a high-pressure system from Siberia was dominating the British Isles. But in the Big Freeze, a new second anticyclone tracked south from Greenland to create a reinforced mass of freezing air that was almost impossible to shift.
It's the blocking situations that bring the lengthier spells of cold or the lengthier spells of hot weather. Wouldn't we just like a few of those?
It was the behavior of these 2 high-pressure systems that threw Britain into a continuing cycle of colder and colder conditions.
The fact that everything was so cold, so iced over, so snowy, meant that There just couldn't be any warmth left in the ground. And don't forget, the sea temperatures were dropping as well. So it really was intense. It was a self-perpetuating system.
The plummeting temperatures meant that Brits faced a huge battle to stay warm, even in the home.
How are you managing to keep warm?
Well, I just have to do the same as you see me now, you know, with a fire and put the electric on and make do, and then go to bed when I get too cold.
The minute you started to go up the stairs, by the time you got to the top, it was 4 below freezing, and you were getting into a bed that was probably 8 below freezing and probably damp, and was actually, by a good chance, have ice in it.
I remember going to bed with pyjamas and socks and a cardigan and a scarf, and of course a hot water bottle.
You certainly never went into the bathroom for a serious wash in the morning because it was too cold. You rushed downstairs in front of the fire, you probably had a bowl in the sink in the kitchen, you put a kettle of water in it and washed as fast as possible with your clothes on.
School was always cold because there was no sort of central heating. And the nuns thought that was quite good for us, and we were cold, cold, cold. I've always found mittens which stop there make your hands very, very cold. You're actually better off just putting them up your sleeves.
But as January drew to a close, there was one moment of warmth for the nation to celebrate. When the BBC's Tonight programme, the cornerstone of the evening schedule, featured an unlikely heroine for the big freeze, as presented by the clip tones of Derek Hart.
It was left to the wife of the Minister of Power, Mrs. Richard Wood, to supply the bathos of the big freeze. I refer, of course, to the tale of the black woolly pants. While her husband was bothering himself with power cuts, gas rationing and coal shortages, Mrs. Wood was quoted as saying that English people don't wear enough clothes, and she allowed herself to be photographed in black fishnet tights and black woolly pants with a little bit of white trimming at the knee.
Right, so, pour the kettle.
Diana Wood, now Lady Holderness, is 94 and still living in London.
How are you, Grandma?
Not as well as I was once. Much better when I was 35.
Her granddaughter Leo visits regularly.
Excellent. Oh, it's so cosy in here. So nice, your fire.
I like having a fire.
Grandma, there was that amazing story of you in the newspaper. Wasn't it wearing your...
Yes.
What was it, wearing sort of underclothes?
Yes, so here.
Can I... Let's have a look, because wasn't it in this book somewhere?
Yes, I think it was in that book, actually.
Let's... it's hilarious.
I used to wear that an awful lot. It was sort of thought all right to do it.
So what, would you wear that under a skirt or something?
I can't think.
In your
It's
fishnet
very
tights.
annoying.
Very racy, Grandma.
Ever so.
Thank goodness for Mrs. Wood, the wife of the Minister of Power, and her black, unglamorous woolly pants. For a moment, they made us forget the power cuts.
They must have been short of a job. I haven't got those pants. I don't know what happened to them.
How did you feel when you were on the front cover of the Daily Mail?
Well, I thought the Daily Mail was a very common paper. It would have been the Times.
Were you weren't embarrassed being on the front page of the newspaper?
Not in the least, but I mean, my relations minded very much.
Why was that?
Renee Kidston said it was perfectly dreadful that she'd seen me on the front of the paper. How could I have possibly done such a thing?
And Grandpa didn't mind?
No, not a
Richard?
bit. No, he thought it was all quite enjoyable.
Diana's husband, Richard Wood, who died in 2002, was a career Tory politician and war hero.
Mr. Wood lost both legs in World War II. He is the son of the late Lord Halifax. As everyone present was aware, Britain cannot nowadays rely on refineries overseas.
That winter, with Britain's transport infrastructure on its knees, the Minister of Power faced huge challenges. The country was running out of coal.
At the moment, the main shortage is in house coal, and the merchants physically find it very difficult to get the coal out from their depots to the people who want it.
How much coal would you normally have here at this time of year?
Roughly about 3 weeks' supply, between 200 and 300 tonnes.
What have you got at the moment here?
Nothing at all.
Are you expecting any coal?
I have no advices of any sort, and I don't see any hopes of getting in the near future.
The main difficulty is the shortage of wagons. The wagons available should be turned round, should be emptied and put back so that they can get more coal as quickly as possible.
We had to be very careful with the coal supplies. I kept checking in the coal shed to make sure we had enough, because there was no guarantee that the coal man would get through.
The coal fire was on in our house. It was lit at 5:30 in the morning, wasn't extinguished till about 11 at night. I mean, that was your only form of heating. Coal was what we lived on. The fire brought joy, it brought warmth.
Besides the coal shortage, the Ministry of Power had another major battle on its hands. But this time, it was man-made.
The electricity unions were in conflict with the government at the worst possible time, when our dependence on heat and light was at its most intense.
I think there was a feeling management was often out of touch with the workforce. And, you know, if you've got good industrial relations, it solves problems. If you've got bad industrial relations, it creates them.
The promises that were made on the Macmillans that everyone would benefit from the economic prosperity post-war didn't materialise for the ordinary working-class person. The trade unions played a key role in holding the government to account.
I was a union rep for years. You always knew when to pick your fights. The power workers knew that the government needed them more than they needed the government.
All through the first half of January, workers at 26 power stations had decided to ban overtime and work to rule, leading to blackouts across the nation.
Best place to be is home by the fireside, waiting for the next power cut.
It was reported that a third of the electricity supply industry had been affected. On the 27th of January, a massive power failure, the worst in 35 years, plunged the East Midlands into darkness.
After a day's work, you come home and there's no hot food, or there's no power. My mum's cooked on the fire, but there would have been no, you know, we'd have had candles. There's no telly, or, you know, yeah, that was tough, I think.
Improvise. That was often the only way. You had to have hot food at any cost.
In London, babies were delivered by candlelight.
I was thinking, thank goodness that didn't happen to me. That was a bit scary to me.
The dispute was only settled after power unions accepted a 2.5 pence an hour pay rise. And now Britain faced another 5 weeks of icy lockdown. There were shortages of all basic commodities, from grit to salt the roads, to food frozen into the ground. How would Brits survive the next and most deadly phase of the Big Freeze? With the Big Freeze entering its 6th week and treacherous road conditions returning with a vengeance, the RAC dubbed February the 3rd Snowplow Sunday.
The Big Freeze set in again, and it was up for about another 5 or 6 weeks. It continued. So in your head you thought, will it ever, ever end?
The thing that really brought it home was the news every night. You saw all these people stranded, and you saw other parts of the country that were completely snowbound.
You'd see the wreckage of pipes, icicles just burst pipes, just on and on. The icicles never melted. So you could sense that this was going to be a forever kind of thing.
I'm afraid there's no sign of a breakdown in this awful cold spell, and it looks as though it's going to go on for 3 or 4 more days longer at least.
What is the cause?
Well, it's due to the presence of anticyclones or high-pressure systems over northern Europe and Greenland. Normally, they're centred over Russia and Siberia, but this year they seem to be a bit out of place.
Now, this is the 30th day of this present cold spell. How does this compare with 1947?
Well, in 1947, the cold spell lasted for 49 days.
Well, to me, the Big Freeze of '63 wasn't anywhere near as exciting as the Big Freeze of 1947, because then I was 6 years old, And, you know, when the snow falls like that for a couple of months, that is really exciting.
The winter of '47 remains the snowiest on record, with drifts nearly 25 feet deep, cutting off many rural communities. Wales was one of the worst affected areas.
There wasn't any snow before Christmas that year. It was mid-January before it really started to kick in. So it was a shorter period of heavy snowfall, but it was much more intense with all that heavy snow coming down.
16 years later, in the Big Freeze, the new dump of snow in February was still a major issue. Road clearing operations ran round the clock in the worst hit areas.
Thank you. How long do you do this for at a time?
Well, sometimes you can work about 18 hours.
That means working in the dark?
Yes, through the darkness.
What do you do in the summertime yourself?
Well, actually, I'm a depot foreman. I'm only taking over this machine temporarily while the other chap is driving another machine, so we can do this snow clearing much more faster.
Do you find this interesting work?
Oh, yes, it makes a change from being in the depot.
All the minor roads over the hills and mountains across the country were completely blocked off. The snowplows were struggling to get through. Even the trains with snowplows on the front were struggling to get through as well.
The battle to keep the railways moving once again became critical.
Still under a heavy blanket of snow, and the railways there haven't escaped the drifts which built up within the past few days. It was in these conditions that two goods trains stuck in drifts. One of them has now been released after being trapped for more than 24 hours.
The Big Freeze's icy grip was now a lethal stranglehold. Rural communities found themselves cut off once again. Farmers' livelihoods were hanging in the balance.
Farmers had a real battle on their hands against the snow and the ice to save their livestock. And although many of them really tried and succeeded, a lot of animals died.
I know the farmers these days in some areas have a tough life and hard to make it all work. But then a lot of their money was just under the snow, sadly, dead animals, which was crucifying.
It was quite vital for the nation, for its milk supply to keep going. We more or less ran on milk and coal, didn't we?
And with milk being one of the absolute staples of the British diet in the early 1960s, the threat of shortages was considered a potential disaster on a national scale.
The farmers were unable to reach their livestock. Cows were going unmilked, and if the cows were indeed milked, the milk churns could not be collected by the milk lorries because the roads were impassable.
Has it been getting better for you during the week?
No, not at all, because as fast as we make a track to get through, that night there's a wind and covers up the tracks. We've got to make a new road more or less the next day.
The travel infrastructure was such that you couldn't get things moving again, so an awful lot of milk actually was lost and had to be thrown away.
Are other farmers in the same difficulty hereabouts?
Well, yes, there's 3 or 4 can't get their milk in, and one chap we hear of, he's filled up every receptacle on the farm with milk, and he just can't get the milk through, and the last we heard, he filled everything, and that was it.
And even when milk bottles did reach the doorstep, Brits had to act fast.
What you had to be very careful of was to get the milk in quickly before it froze, because when it did, the cream would pop out of the top of the bottle, and we had a lovely ice cream lolly to have a lick on.
The return of the Big Freeze created a cascade of food shortages. Vegetable prices soared to 5 times the normal amount.
How long are we going to have to go on paying these high prices for vegetables?
Well, so while this weather continues, the cold weather, frosty weather, icy weather.
Can we expect a serious shortage of vegetables?
There'll be a lighter supply this weekend, and obviously prices are going to be up compared to what they were a week or so ago. As far as potatoes are concerned, which I think worries most housewives, they may cost a copper or so a pound more.
Farmers even had to resort to pneumatic drills to excavate their carrots from the frozen ground. But with no possibility of sowing early spring crops and the very real threat of fresh produce running out, the ministry urged Brits to be thrifty and not panic buy.
Providing the people buy just their normal requirements, I'm quite sure there's going to be sufficient for everyone, and there's no suggestion of a potato famine.
The rationing days were so strongly still in people's minds, suddenly seemed to have returned as people were going down to their cellars to retrieve apples and potatoes that they might have left there 6 months earlier.
We all coped in those days because we had to. There was no question about it. If your dad didn't go to work, you didn't get the money coming in, and that was the philosophy for everybody in my little town.
Oh, I think it got serious for me when we started not being able to get to work. Buses couldn't go on the roads because the roads were too treacherous, they couldn't get through.
I talked to my dad about his experience. There was an expectation, despite all the ice and the snow on the roads, people had to go to work still. He used to get picked up by one of his co-workers, was an Indian guy. They went to the car, they were driving to work, the car got stuck in the ice, and the car was whizzing round and round and round, and he was like, fearful for his life. So, is this going to be the end of my days?
I had a little Mini, and that skidded all over the place, and there were quite a few locations I couldn't get to because of the weather, which was very frustrating.
You thought, will I be stuck in this house, never able to get out and drive my car? Will I be able to go and see my mother and take my baby with me?
Sport was hit by the weather in an extensive way. There was absolutely no horse racing at all throughout that winter. And of course, football pitches were frozen solid.
Remember football? It was the game the British used to play and watch every Saturday until 7 weeks ago.
Over 500 official matches would be cancelled. The FA Cup saw 261 postponements in the third round alone. It became the longest-lasting round in the history of the tournament.
Since the big freeze, 66 league clubs haven't had the chance to play a match at home, and over 250,000 fans haven't had the chance to see them. And tomorrow looks a bleak prospect too.
This was week after week after week of bad weather, and the frustration for a youngster like me was that it just shut out what I was obsessed with. You know, you couldn't watch it, you couldn't play it.
Don't forget, these were the days when you didn't really have undersoil heating. They used to have these drums, didn't they, with fires in them.
Coventry City was part of the community, and because we lived so close to the ground, we'd all get asked to go to the ground, and all the kids from the neighbourhood would go and help the club out. And on a Wednesday night, they let all the local kids in for sixpence, and they gave us a cup of tea for that.
And frozen pitches meant the nation was deprived of a weekly ritual first established in 1923, when every Saturday night, families would gather to see if they had won a fortune.
The football pools now seems prehistoric, really, but it was the forerunner of the lottery. It was for everybody. You didn't have to be a football fan.
Punters simply had to guess 8 score draws from the list of fixtures that week. But during the big freeze, with no matches being played, a committee, including 3 ex-footballers and a Tory MP, met for the first time behind closed doors in London's Connaught Hotel. The Pools Panel was born.
They would guess what might have been the result of football matches that actually had never even taken place. And even Lord Brabazon, the chairman of this extraordinary scratch committee that had been put together, pronounced the entire thing to be a farce.
Yeah, it was a bit of fun, but it actually reached out to everybody, as the lottery does in many ways today. So that was invented because of the big freeze.
Finally, after 10 long weeks, came the first signs that the big freeze was turning into the big thaw.
I remember the end as if it was yesterday. That was the most exciting, I think. Because I think we, in all truth, become a bit bored with it all.
Now it would be time to count the costs and come to terms with the tragedies of the coldest winter on record.
Ornithologists reckon that about half of all our wild bird population died. They perished either through the cold or starvation or both.
These days, snow is something of a rare treat, and even though 1963's big freeze lasted nearly 3 months, Brits were still determined to have some fun.
In spite of gloomy weather reports, snow can be fun, whether sliding down the slopes on a tin tray or a toboggan.
I think we more or less invented winter sport in the big freeze because everybody seemed to have a go at it, you know. Obviously, sledging down the nearest hill, but also people took to skating on the ponds. I had a go at skating on a pond.
We didn't have any skates, but we did have a lake, and the lake was frozen. And so slithering around in our gumboots was a thrilling experience because it had never frozen before, and we knew it was safe to go out right into the middle.
This really is a winter wonderland, and the scouts say they feel in the pink out here. The most difficult thing is finding our way about on a route march when the routes are hidden under giant snowdrifts.
You couldn't ride your bike because it was just too slippy. So, you know, we used to take Alan's dog for a walk. I mean, there was so much snow. I mean, it was like unreal.
Throughout the winter of '63, schools did their best to stay open whatever the conditions.
My overriding memory, I had to walk to school along this main road, and it was very difficult. Nothing was moving on the road, of course, but the ice was precarious. It was very difficult to stand up. I did fall over an awful lot, got a lot of bruises. My playground was completely frozen over. You just couldn't play football. It was an absolute nightmare. I don't think, to my memory, we were ever sent home early, ever.
Pupils' experiences in 1963 seem in stark contrast compared to those of 2018. During the Beast from the East, over 2,500 schools closed.
This World Book Day, Narnia wasn't found on the pages of a C.S. Lewis novel, but on the slopes of Roundwood Park in Harleston.
But as the big freeze stretched into late February, it became clear that the freezing conditions had taken a terrible toll on the country.
During that winter, it was estimated that 120 people had lost their lives, actually in the snow. But that didn't begin to cover the amount of people who had lost their lives and their livelihoods throughout that winter, whether it was in hospital or whether it was farmers who were unable to farm their lands or whole businesses that were just going bust.
And the suffering encountered by Britain's animal and bird life was on an almost unimaginable scale.
People were advised to keep their cats indoors for fear of foxes that were out on the prowl hunting in pairs.
Ornithologists reckon that about half of all our wild bird population died. They perished either through the cold or starvation or both. It was as bad for water birds as well because the sea froze in places, lakes and ponds and rivers and streams were all frozen over.
Kestrels were seen feeding on urban bird tables where normally you would see a sparrow or a robin. It was a very alarming, unreal, almost surreal time for wildlife.
I'd found a little dead robin which had literally died of cold. The north wind will blow and we shall have snow. And what will the robin do then, poor thing? He'll sit in a barn to keep himself warm. Hide his head under his wing, poor thing. But this little one hadn't. He died, and it broke my heart.
It was probably the 5th of March, 6th of March, something like that, when you could finally say goodbye to that really hard winter, which many of us had not seen the like of before.
I remember the end as if it was yesterday. That was the most exciting, I think. Because I think we, in all truth, become a bit bored with it all.
There was a lot of thawing and a lot of burst pipes because we had the old form of piping then that burst quite easily. Many, many people suffered that.
As 10 weeks of the accumulated snow and ice blanketed across large areas of the country started to melt, a new danger presented itself.
I know there was a lot of flooding came from the River Severn, over on the western side of the Midlands and coming off Wales, from the mountains of Wales, and also up around the Lake Districts as well.
The peril of the big thaw was that the snow all melted, and then there was so much flooding because the drains, nothing could take it all away.
And with the thaw came the longed-for first signs of recovery.
What a wonderful thing about nature is that it has this capacity for bouncing back. And that's what happened after the big freeze. After the big thaw, along came breeding season for most creatures, and numbers were bouncing back. Nature and humans were starting to get back to normal.
The immediate impact of the big freeze would also cost the British taxpayer dear.
When it came to do the final reckoning of what this winter might have cost the country, it was estimated then to be about £200 million, which may not sound very much, but if you reckon that in today's money, it's something upward of £5 billion. And it was £5 billion spent on keeping the country going through that snow and ice. It's a colossal sum of money.
As the country emerged from the big freeze, the warm days of spring 1963 would also welcome a new cultural dawn for Britain.
Speak out, act out, run, dance, have sex. Take the new contraceptive pill that has just been made available.
The end of the big freeze with the floods of March 1963 marked a watershed moment for Britain's post-war era. Traditional deference to the establishment would be swept away by a new generation determined to do things their way.
People wanted change. People wanted change in terms of political leadership. People wanted change in terms of lifestyle and economic choices. And more importantly, I think there was this cultural change, which was reflected in music, reflected in fashion, reflected in lifestyle.
Speak out, act out, run, dance, have sex. Take the new contraceptive pill that has just been made available.
And one of the loudest voices extolling this shift in cultural values was a satirical and subversive TV show.
This is BBC Television.
That was the week that was, popularly known as TW3, which was a programme that came out of this burgeoning satirical movement.
No target was off limits, as TW3 gleefully tackled controversial issues such as dissatisfaction with the government, using biting wit and sarcasm.
Now, Macmillan, he's under a cloud, isn't he? Then for God's sake, say so. And why is he under a cloud? Because of the decline of the Tory image. Decline of Tory image.
TW3 was fantastic. It was funny, it was eloquent.
So this programme was iconic because they were brave. It was so satirical, and I remember thinking, how does David Frost get away with that?
The establishment was no longer sacred, as within 3 months of the Big Freeze, scandal began to engulf the Macmillan government.
There was a rumour, an increasingly loud rumour, that the Minister for War, John Profumo, had had an affair with a young woman named Christine Keeler in her early 20s, and that she in turn had slept with a Russian spy. And the implication was that the secrets that Profumo had passed to Christine Keeler had in turn been divulged to the Russian spy.
It seemed to grip the country, the Profumo-Keeler scandal. It had everything that you could possibly look for. It had the beautiful girls. It had government ministers. It had the idea of Russians. It had sports cars and swimming pools, things that seemed to be luxury items. It had everything that was forbidden, out of bounds, longed for, dangerous.
The Profumo affair was really the last straw for Harold Macmillan's government. He was no longer the right person at the right time to be governing our country. He was out of date. He needed to go.
8 months after the frozen winter of 1963, Macmillan was out of office, and the 60s started to swing.
Just at this time, teetering on this edge, came false eyelashes, miniskirts, Mary Quant, which went to hell with all that old stuff.
This is an outdoor fashion show by one of the youngest of British designers, Mary Quant, who's been quick to pick up this new touch-up paint technique of setting off her young, unorthodox dresses.
She didn't just invent the miniskirt because it was a fashionable item. She presented her new, very, very short skirt as something that would enable women to run in, work in, move in, function in.
Proud moment surely for Mary Quant, honoured by winning the award for Britain.
The Cultural Revolution, ushered in by the end of the Big Freeze, had its own defiant soundtrack.
There was another band, the Rolling Stones. They were flatmates, and they were something else, because Mick Jagger, who was simultaneously a student at the London School of Economics with aspirations to go to work for the Financial Times as a correspondent, people would fall down and nearly break their legs in the enthusiasm to dance along with the Rolling Stones.
British society was thawing, but the Big Freeze also had another major impact. A community spirit not experienced since World War II.
I remember the whole community went and fetched the pensions for the pensioners, because the pensioners couldn't walk on the ice and snow. You were expected to look after the older members of your community. Absolutely expected.
One particular day, I had to go to the shops to get some provisions, but there was a girl across the road, and I had seen her a few times, and I knew she had young children, and I went across, and so I said to her, you know, do you need anything? And you couldn't carry too much back either, but she needed some eggs or milk or something like that. And to this very day, she's still one of my best friends over there.
I think people were more used to discomfort. I don't think, in the end, they were tougher when it comes to it. You know, as we saw during COVID, when it comes to it, people can and do make tremendous sacrifices.
I think there's lots of parallels today because I think with the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic, we've had that similar community spirit.
That's great. Oh, no, I've got something excellent there.
No worries.
Much appreciated, mate. Thanks.
I think it's an example that people have adopted over the last 2 years as well. I think it's a feeling that has definitely come back. We'll manage somehow. We'll get through this. We can do it. We can do it together.
And just as those who lived through the COVID pandemic will never forget, the big freeze of 1962-63 left an indelible mark on those who lived through it.
Everything was no longer the same it had been before. Things weren't so predictable. Well, nothing was predictable after that.
That severe winter of 62-63 had a massive influence on me. I was interested in the weather from that moment onwards because I wanted to try and understand and try and explain exactly what had been going on in my formative years. And it was inevitable, really, in the end, that I would go on and move to join the Met Office.
It's a strange double winter of an awareness of an adult world, which I probably would not have had the snow not begun to fall, and my own exuberance at just being 8 years old and having fun.